Well, the latest story update, Desperate Defiance, dropped with update 7.5 in late May. And if nothing else, I think it shattered the hope that some people might have been clinging to, that the move to Broadsword was going to usher in a new golden age for the game. Because with this update there was a very noticeable drop in quality. And that's compared to updates where we've already seen quite a lot of corner cutting. But I do try to be even-handed with these things and point out the positives where I can find them. I have to say I'm a little hard-pressed to do that with this update, but what I can say is that at least something finally happened in this update. The story finally moved. But before I get any further into that, I'll warn you that I am going to spoil everything, including the ending of the story, so if you haven't played it yet and you want to see it for yourself, you know what to do. Okay, so yes, as I said, the story finally moved. First we finally get the blasted holocron, and then at the end Shay shows up and breaks Malgus out of his chair. Now we knew that Malgus wasn't going to stay in that chair forever, I just didn't think it was going to be Shay who busted him out. At this point I'm just done with her idiocy, and when my characters see her next, I hope that the ones who would get the chance to kill her. But like I said, at least something finally happened, and we didn't simply do a bunch of busy work to circle right back to where we started, as has been the case with most of the recent updates. Unfortunately, the execution of both of these big story moments left a lot to be desired. Shay freeing Malgus was a surprising conclusion to the story, and the cinematic was nice and action-packed. However, it all felt too easy. There was no pushback. She and her team bust into the fleet, destroy all the droids, and take out the security, and break Malgus out of his chair without so much as a casualty. Now as to that holocron, you know, the thing we've been chasing down for 2 years now? Well, you'd think finding it would be the climactic moment of the story, a really powerful, impactful thing. But it's not. When we finally get to it, it feels more like an afterthought, just a pretext to get Sahar in the same room with Rakan. The holocron and the machine that it powers is completely unguarded. There is no effort to stop our characters from walking up to the machine, and had they acted with even the slightest bit of urgency, they could have snatched the holocron and been gone. But they don't. They loiter around staring at the holocron just long enough for Rakan to show up. And that's the real focus of this scene. This moment, finding the holocron, exists solely to set up the confrontation between Sahar and Rakan, because that's where the writer's interests lie. And this is where they put all their effort. Our characters stand around and watch as Sahar and Rakan yell at each other. We get the privilege of watching Rakan shove our characters around some more and be saved by Sahar. It's clear the writers are deeply invested in the relationship between Sahar and Rakan. Unfortunately, I'm not. And I don't like my character being sidelined, feeling like a sidekick, or worse, like an inconvenience to the writers, who have to deal with them simply because they're there and they're the player character, when they'd rather just focus on their two favorites. And that's what it feels like here. And frankly, for much of this story. And that's one of my biggest complaints about this story. This is the Sahar show. Our characters are merely there because they have to be. The conflicts are hers, and all the big moments are hers. We're simply there to watch. From the moment we first meet her on Mek Shah, it's clear that the story is about Sahar's guilt. Guilt for helping Hedda Cole build a machine and use it on innocent people. Guilt for her brother being left behind when they were children. When we get to Hutta and finally confront the local crime boss, Yusindu, it's Sahar who decides to blow up the barrels. Our characters can encourage her or tell her not to. It doesn't matter, she'll do it anyway. When we finally meet Audie and Racket, the leaders of the worker uprising, Audie goes on quite a bit about how Sahar is feeling bad and how helping people eases some of her pain. I'm not sure whether he knows this because he has the Force or he can just read it in her face. We don't really know. We don't learn that much about them. And when at last we finally get to Hedda's ship, it's Sahar who tells us what to do and where to go. And like I mentioned, when we finally get to the holocron, the story shifts from being about the holocron and the machine to Sahar and Rakan. On the other hand, the only conflict our PCs seem to have is with their faction, and that's because the writing has railroaded them into protecting Shay. When we speak to our faction leaders at the beginning of the story, at no point are we allowed to agree with them and say that, yes indeed, the Mandalorians do pose a threat, and we do need to take them out, or at least get them under control. We can come clean about what we know about Shay, i.e. that she's missing, but that's it. We can't outright agree with them. And to make matters worse, we abruptly end the conversation to speak to Sahar. Thus, we are forced to end the meeting with the faction leaders on a tense and sour note, even if that's not how we would like to have that relationship play out. And when we finally speak to them again at the end of the story to discuss the holocron, our characters are made to feel like outsiders as opposed to actual members of the faction again. Krovos is ordering us around like we're her minion, despite the fact that we may be the Empire's Wrath or another Dark Council member. It's even worse on the Republic side. If your character suggests that you might send the newly awakened Force users to the Jedi, Arn will proceed to tell us that can't happen. If you press him on it, he will simply say, it's just not possible, and he's really sorry, but it's not his call. And you have no different dialogue whether your character is a Jedi, a member of the Jedi Council might I add, or a trooper or a smuggler. Your Jedi can't say, I know it's not your call, it is my call. I will discuss with the Council what we're going to do with them. It certainly absolutely isn't up to you. All you can do is meekly turn away and accept Arn's word as law. And this is absolutely infuriating. Unfortunately, it was also not surprising, as there is practically no class-specific dialogue in this update at all. And yes, that means our Sith and Jedi can't use the Force even when they should be able to. The most egregious example of this comes at the very end when we are faced with a choice between grabbing the holocron and helping Sahar save her idiot brother. Our Sith and Jedi should be able to grab the holocron with the Force, and frankly, they should be able to grab Sahar and her idiot brother with the Force as well. I remember a scene where my consular did this on Terrace. Yes, way back on Terrace during the class story. But no, they have to physically run over to grab the holocron and then try to run over and save Sahar. And of course, that just makes our Sith and Jedi look like idiots. And I'm tired of my characters looking like idiots, or being treated like minions or servants to a bunch of random nobodies. Unfortunately, as much as I hate it, I've come to expect it these days because, like I said, RPCs aren't the main character anymore and haven't been for quite some time. And that's making it harder and harder for me to want to drag my characters through these updates. But while that's probably the biggest problem I have with this update, it's certainly not the only problem it has. The pacing is uneven, made worse by the fact that we are forced to stop twice and do a set of 4 daily-like missions. They seem to serve no purpose other than to pad out the time, and they're just tedious and annoying. And of course, everything is made worse by those jarring switches between KOTOR-style dialogue and the normal cinematics. Everyone hated it on Kessin's Landing, and it's even worse here, as even more cinematics have been turned into KOTOR-style dialogue. And if you were hoping it was going to get better from here, it's not. The dramatic increase in these kinds of cutscenes alarmed a lot of players, and they took to the forums to complain and ask and wonder what was happening, whether we were going to be losing voice acting altogether, and just what direction the game was actually going in. Usually the devs don't respond to this, but the outcry was quite large, so at last they finally did. Ashley Rule, the game's narrative director, came to the forums to once again try to reassure players, and she said that with their smaller teams going forward, they were going to have to make some choices and scale back on the cinematics because cinematics are hard, and she wanted to give her team a good work-life balance. So they would choose the most impactful scenes and use the normal cinematics on those. Everything else would be relegated to KOTOR-style dialogue. She went on to extol the virtues of this kind of cutscene, telling us that in fact they are better than the cinematic dialogue because there are so many more choices that they can give us. They can give us dialogue options that match our origin stories or romances or other choices that we've made throughout our story, thereby making the story more personal and meaningful. This is an argument they've trotted out for years whenever they want to defend the use of KOTOR-style dialogue. And while I don't necessarily disagree in principle, the fact is that's not how they ever use it, and that's not how they used it in 7.5. The dialogue options we get in the KOTOR-style scenes are no more personal and no more compelling than the stuff we get in the regular cinematics. But unfortunately, it looks like they're here to stay. As someone on the forums mentioned, if they're having trouble getting the cinematics done because they take too long, they might try focusing on cinematics that are relevant to the PC instead of all of these other NPCs. However, I don't expect that to happen because our characters aren't the main focus of the story anymore. So there it is, my impressions of Update 7.5, Desperate Defiance. I know this one was fairly negative, and I'm sorry about that. I just couldn't find a lot to like about it. And that's unfortunate because I don't want to hate it. But let us know what you think in the comments, and if you like this video, why not like and subscribe for more content like this? And as always, thanks for watching.